Today, I'm talking about my problem with the top 10 highest paid quarterback contracts and why NFL teams aren't paying for success as much as they probably should be on this edition of Shumake Take Rants. Let's get it. All right, and welcome in everybody. Thank you for stopping by and hope you're having an awesome, fantastic, fantabulous freaking day. My name is Garrett Shumake and you are listening to Shumake Take Rants. This is Shumake Take Rants number 8, and today we are talking about my problem with the top 10 highest paid quarterback contracts and why teams are not paying based off success as much as they probably should. So, as you know, there is no housekeeping for Shumake Take Rants. That is kind of a rare thing, but most of these, we just kind of jump straight into them. But if you don't know what Shumake Take Rants is all about, for Shumake Take Rants, I pretty much take a common debate, common problem, common controversy within the NFL landscape, and I kind of throw my hat into the ring, and we talk about it, talk about the nuance, talk about the ins and the outs, and pretty much give you not only my opinion, but also try to give an objective take on the situation as well. This one is going to be a little bit more opinionated than normal, although I have on my script here, I will be looking at this a lot more often because I got stats. I got stats for y'all today, and it's because we're talking, like I said, we're talking about the top 10 highest paid quarterback contracts and why I have a problem with it. And at a glance, it's understandably as to why. Because a lot of these quarterbacks have gotten paid and they haven't had a ton of playoff success. But before we get into that, what does it mean when a quarterback, or any player for that matter, is overpaid? First things first, it's entirely subjective. It's based on value. So whether that is, how you value a certain, that's for anything in life, I should say this. It's for anything in life. Does it, do you value video games over food, for example? I know that's pretty drastic, but that's like a common example. Value is subjective. How someone views one thing and how they might view it up here, someone else might view it down here. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. You guys got it. But for a quarterback, it is objectively the most valuable position in football. And in my opinion, it's the most valuable position in all of sports. There is no harder position to play in all of professional sports worldwide than the NFL quarterback. Why? Because it's not just because you're supposed to be the best. It takes all this mental stuff and whatnot. Like, we all understand that. We all know that if you follow football. But the thing is, with being the most valuable position in the NFL, you have the highest expectations. You're expected to be. You're supposed to expect it to be the face of your franchise, the face of the team. You're supposed to be expected to be the best player in your team, a leader. You're expected to be a lot of different things if you're a starting quarterback in the National Football League. That's not new. But with that, when you're successful, comes the highest amount of praise, to the point where you look at Patrick Mahomes, who's the best quarterback in the league right now, and he's getting more glaze than a Krispy Kreme donut, hot and ready. It's not Little Caesars. What am I talking about? Oh my god, I never would have thought I was going to mention Krispy Kreme donuts in a show, but you know what? Hey, when we do a year in review, if the show ever gets that far, maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe I'll remember this and we'll talk about Patrick Mahomes and glazed donuts. However, along with this highest amount of praise, you receive the highest amount of criticism, whether it's warranted or not. Most of the time, when a team loses, the blame goes to the quarterback. And when it comes to playoff success, there is a big example of this right now in the NFL. Quarterback Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills. Believe it or not, even though he has a losing record in the playoffs right now as of the recording of this video, Josh Allen, if you look at his playoff stats, compared to his peers across the league, they're pretty darn good. And that's a nuance that we'll talk about later on in the show, in this rant. But for now, there's a couple prefaces or a couple disclaimers I want to get off first. First things first, I'm not dogging on any of these quarterbacks because of the contract they got paid, because whether they're deserving it or not as people. No, as people, good for them. Good for them to get generational wealth for them and their families. That is awesome. I'm not saying they're not deserving of it because of that. It's more going to be, I'm going to try and make it more reflected towards, okay, just look at their playoff record and then kind of look at it as an organizational type of thing. So we'll see what it's going to look like. I think you guys will understand where I'm coming from as it pans out. But also, when it comes to these contracts, I'm just going to list off like how many years and what the contract was for roughly. I know there's a couple that are like 0.5, 0.3. I'm leaving those out. We'll just use the baseline number. I'm not going to look at cap hits and whatnot. And that's the thing too. NFL player contracts, are not as black and white as people make them out to be. There's a lot more nuance to the contract itself because, for example, Dak is the highest paid quarterback now, 4 years, $240 million. The average annual value is $60 million per year, but Dak is not making $60 million per year. His cap hit this year is like $29 million or something like that. NFL contracts are backloaded, so you won't get as much money in the first couple years, but it'll stack up to the last couple years of the contract. And the thing too is that that makes it a lot more diversified, and teams also have outs at certain points in the contract which can save them a boatload or a majority of that money. But ultimately, if you pay a quarterback that type of contract, the contracts that I'm about to tell you guys in the top 10, you kind of expect them to play it all the way through, and bring continued success to your franchise. That's ultimately why you extend a player, because you like what they're doing for you and you want them to do more for your franchise, so you compensate them for it. That's a baseline level of NFL contract stuff. That's probably not even necessary for the show, but just wanted to put the disclaimer out there. But we got to get into it right now. These are the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. Number 1, Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott, 4 years, $240 million. Number 2, Jordan Love, 4 years, $220 million. Joe Burrow, number 3, 5-year, $275 million. I probably should say that it's based on average annual value. I didn't really think about this until this very moment, but just this thing. Okay, it's based on average annual value. I forgot to do my research here when I was making the script. I got done with the script like 20 minutes ago, so it's still kind of fresh, still kind of raw. Maybe not as completed as I want it to be. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm kind of worried, but we'll see how well this plays out. We're gonna take it like a champ. But anyways, number 3, Joe Burrow, 5-year, $275. Trevor Lawrence for the Jacksonville Jaguars, 5-year, $275 million. Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, 4-year, $212 million. Number 6, quarterback for the Lions, Jared Goff, 5 years, $212 million. Number 7, Justin Herbert for the Chargers, 5-year, $262 million. Lamar Jackson, quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, 5-year, $260 million. Number 9, Jalen Hurts for the Philadelphia Eagles, 5 years, $255 million. And then number 10, the Cardinals quarterback, Kyler Murray, 5 years, $230 million. I don't know why I said that, how I said that. That's kind of sounded like an announcer, almost like the UFC. I was like, let's get ready to rumble. I'm kind of speaking very fast, but there you go. Those are the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL based on average annual value. It's not here on the list, unfortunately, but that is the contract that these quarterbacks have gotten paid. Now, let's look at the playoff records. I'm not including 2024 because the 2024 season just started. We have no idea what's going to happen. But this is the playoff, the amount of playoff. 1 second. How am I going to word this? I'm going to list you how many years have they made the playoffs based on how many years they've been in the league. Or I should say how many years they've been a starter. And then what their what their actual playoff record is. So for example, number 1, Dak Prescott. Like we're gonna go from Dak Prescott down to Kyler Murray in the same order. So number 1 will be Dak Prescott. Number 2 will be Jordan Love. Number 3 will be Burrow. So on, so forth. Dak Prescott has made the playoffs 5 out of his 8 years in his career, not including 2024. I repeat, not including this season, 2024. So he's made the playoffs 5 out of 8 years, 2-5 playoff record. Jordan Love, 1 year as a starter, has made it 1 time, 1-1 playoff record. Let me see. Can't remember these by heart. Joe Burrow has made it to the playoffs 2 out of his 4 years in his career being a starting quarterback. 5-2 playoff record. Number 4, Trevor Lawrence made the playoffs 1 out of his 3 years so far as a starting quarterback. Playoff record of 1-1. Number 5, Tua Tagovailoa. He has made it 2 out of 4 years of his time being in the league and has not played in any playoff game, so his current playoff record is 0-0. Number 6, Jared Goff. He has made the playoffs 4 out of 8 times in his career at a 5-4 playoff record. Number 7, Justin Herbert has made the playoffs 1 time out of 4 years with an 0-1 playoff record. Number 8, Lamar Jackson has made the playoffs 5 out of 6 years of his career as a starting quarterback. 2018 is kind of an asterisk year because Joe Flacco technically started it and Lamar Jackson finished it, but he did lead the team to the playoffs and he did start in that playoff game in 2018, and his total playoff record right now is 2-4. Number 9, for Jalen Hurts, he's made the playoffs 3 out of his 4 years starting for the Philadelphia Eagles with a 2-3 playoff record. Wait a second, is that even correct? That is correct. Okay, I had to think about it for a second. I was kind of confused. I had a little brain fart. Then lastly, Kyler Murray has made it to the playoffs 1 out of 5 years as a starting quarterback with an 0-1 playoff record. So what does all this stats mean? What does this come up to? Well, let me put it into a different perspective. Combined, they have a 17-22 record in the playoffs. That's a total combined 39 playoff games, and that means quarterbacks in the top 10 so far throughout their careers have won playoff games only 43% of the time. That's a very, very low number. Obviously that's less than 50%. But that means if these quarterbacks are all going to make the playoffs this year, for example, not even half of them would win their games, which is crazy to me. Combined in total, out of taking all of their years playing in the league combined. So it's 48 total seasons combined between all the quarterbacks playing in all the seasons in their career. Only 26 seasons out of the combined 48 have these 10 quarterbacks collectively have made the playoffs in their entire careers altogether. That's a 54% rate. Likewise, out of these top 10 quarterbacks, how many of them have a winning record in the playoffs? 2 of them. That would be Jared Goff and Joe Burrow. And how many of them have a losing record? 5 of them. That would be Dak Prescott. That would be Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and then Kyler Murray. With 4 out of those quarterbacks being 7 through 10, for context. And lastly, combined Super Bowls. There have been 3 collective Super Bowl appearances between these quarterbacks, and all of them have not won a single one. They're 0-3. The 3 quarterbacks that have made a Super Bowl on this list are as follows. Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, and Jalen Hurts. 3 times, that's it. So here's why I think the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks, why it's a problem. First things first, the lack of playoff appearances. The thing is, well, I shouldn't say lack of appearances. Let me backtrack this. I put this in my script. I'm going to backtrack this real quick. Because with them making the playoffs, Dak has made it 5 out of 8 times. That's more than 50%. Jordan Love has made it 1 out of 4 times. 50% for Joe Burrow. 1 out of 3 for Trevor Lawrence. 5 for Trevor. You know what? I take it back, actually. I take it back. Because only two quarterbacks have made multiple playoff appearances, which is Dak and Jared Goff, have made the playoffs more than 50% of their career. The rest of them are either less than 50% or at 50%, which is the majority. So let's go back to it, actually. There's the lack of playoff appearances. Now, why the team and why these quarterbacks didn't make the playoffs in the years that they didn't make it, there's a lot of nuance to that, which we'll get to later. But that is that's a little concerning for me. At a base level, looking at it in somewhat of a vacuum, this is concerning to me. Why? Because when you're the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, or when you're one of the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, I kind of expect you to constantly be in the playoff race. I kind of expect you to be there all the time. And again, in a somewhat of a vacuum, that doesn't seem to be the case. Which kind of makes me wonder, what are we being paid for? You know, looking at how they've played and them not making the playoffs as much as you would expect them to, kind of makes you think for a second. Then you look at lack of playoff production. You look at some of their stats in the playoffs. You know, let me list some of this off. Dak, I mean, I don't have specific playoff stats here in the data. This is just my general understanding of how well they've played in the playoffs. Just telling you, this is anecdotal. This is not empirical stats. So this is one of the first flaws in the data, and there will be more. I have a whole section dedicated to flaws in the data later on in the video. But Dak Prescott, 2-5 playoff record, right? Hasn't shown that he can play consistently well in the playoffs. Jordan Love last year, first year as a starting quarterback, made the playoffs, played great against the Cowboys, coincidentally enough, and then played great against the 49ers in the divisional round. So far, in the first year of Jordan Love making the playoffs as a starting quarterback, even though he went 1-1, his playoff stats are pretty good. He played well in both of those games. Then you look at Joe Burrow. His time playing in the playoffs. He's always had great playoff performances. He's played really well. There was a couple games there where it's kind of but when you think about Joe Burrow and how he plays in the playoffs, he plays well. That's fair. Like, that's a pretty fair and pretty acceptable assumption to have. Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion, is probably the biggest offender on this list. Just about. Because Trevor Lawrence has only made the playoffs one time, 1-1 playoff record, and his one playoff win came against the Chargers where they were down 28, came back to win. So even in that game, did he have a great game overall? Sure, he finished great, but that first half he was not good. He was garbage. So he was not consistent in the one game he did win, and then against Kansas City, he was just kind of meh. He wasn't good, he wasn't bad. It was meh. And then you look at Tua, top 5 highest paid quarterback, and he hasn't started a single playoff game in his career. The Dolphins have made the playoffs twice. They've made it the past 2 years. But because of injury, he hasn't been there. And we'll talk more about Tua's injury. I'm not going to say too much more past that because of what happened on Thursday Night Football. It's sad. It's unfortunate. And we will talk more about it on Sunday with episode 13 comes out. But moving on, Jared Goff. Jared Goff in the playoffs has been a little bit up and down. He's had a couple years, like 2017. You know, they had one playoff game, they lost it, and he was all right. Wasn't great, wasn't bad. Then, of course, 2018. That's when they went to the Super Bowl, lost it to the New England Patriots. But throughout the playoffs, he played well, and then the Super Bowl came around, and he did not play good. But then again, that Super Bowl wasn't good in general. That was one of the most boring Super Bowls I've ever watched in my entire life, if it was not the most boring Super Bowl I've ever watched in my life. And I've watched plenty of them. But then it was 2020 they made it. I can't remember how well he played. But then you jump to 2023. And 2023 played incredible. Played absolutely incredible. Played well against the Rams. Played well against Tampa. And played well against San Francisco. Obviously, they lost that game last year in the NFC Championship game, which sucks. But I just hit the table. But hey, he played well. So at least recently with that last year, he's played well. So I guess we can say he's on the up and up as for now. Specifically now. Justin Herbert, he played one game in the playoffs. He played awful in that game against the Jaguars. Was not good. Did not get it done. And then Lamar Jackson's another one of those quarterbacks that have been up and down, up and down. Although, while he's had his ups, it's pretty fair to say that he's had more downs. There's a couple of games where he's had absolute stinkers. Ones that come to mind are the 2019 AFC Divisional Round against Tennessee, the Divisional Round against Buffalo in 2020. Then there's was it last year in the AFC Championship game against the Kansas City Chiefs? That wasn't that good of a game. So outside of his couple wins in the playoff losses, it's pretty commonly accepted that Lamar did not play good in those games. Was he terrible? No, but he definitely was nowhere near good enough for those those Ravens teams to win those games. Then Jalen Hurts, he had a great divisional round, blew out the Giants. The NFC Championship game against the 49ers, blew them out, then came close, but no cigar to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. Lost it, although I thought he was a contender for Super Bowl MVP. He had an incredible freaking game. I thought he played better than Mahomes in Super Bowl 55, right? Is that right? Yeah, Super Bowl 55, good lord. Wait. That's right, yeah, Super Bowl 55. My memory's kind of blurry right now. But then lastly, Kyler Murray, he made one playoff game and he was absolutely awful. He was awful. It was over by halftime. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And here's the thing. Where am I going back to this? So there's a lack of playoff production, and then of course the lack of playoff wins is another concerning factor, only winning 43% of the time. And here's the thing. I know that there's more nuance to this, as I said. But the lack of playoff wins is concerning to me. But I'd be offering to say that here's this. Here's a benefit of the doubt. At least with the majority of these quarterbacks, they're going into year 4, year 5. Outside of Lamar, Jared Goff, Dak, and Kyler Murray, these quarterbacks have not been in the league for more than 6 years. And so they still have obviously plenty of their careers left to go. As for all of these quarterbacks, of course, this is current. This is not, going to be reflective of their future. It's not going to be predictive of what that's going to look like. And likewise, something could change drastically this season. One of these quarterbacks could go on and win the Super Bowl this year. That's very, very possible. And we'll get to why here at the end of the show. It's cool. Well, it's not. Probably won't explain why, but it'll get there. It'll make sense at the end. I promise. But the lack of overall playoff appearances, the lack of overall playoff production, and the lack of overall playoff wins out of these top 10 highest paid quarterbacks is concerning to me because when you're paid that much, you're expected to be the best, and with them not playing at their best at the biggest stage of the NFL, it's hard. It makes it really hard to look at that and say these contracts are not overrated. In my opinion, the only quarterback contract on this entire list that's justifiable for what it is Joe Burrow. Because he made the Super Bowl and he played great, but he's been consistently great in the playoffs. The only other winning quarterback on this list is Jared Goff. And even then, I don't know if Jared Goff is deserving of the contract that he had. Just because he's been inconsistent. He hasn't been consistent enough. Although, with Detroit, he's been nothing but great. So, there's a benefit. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Credit where credit's due. Ever since he's been with Detroit, he's been great. So, if we put the Rams to the side, whatever. I can accept it. Fine. But then you look at guys like Dak Prescott, who just got paid. What are we doing here? Dak Prescott has never played well in the playoffs. Even his playoff wins, they were not that great. And it's like, what has he done in the postseason to deserve that contract? Nothing. Jordan Love, what has he done? Nothing. He had 1 year as a starting quarterback. You are not deserving of, with your play, you are not deserving of being the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL based off of 1 year of being a starting quarterback and not even being good for that entire season. Jordan Love was garbage the first half of the year and then finished off and played really freaking good. Likewise, for Trevor Lawrence, for rookie year, bad. Whether that's not his fault, Urban Meyer was there, the team was a mess, whatever. We can move past that. But year 2, first half of the year, just like Jordan Love, first half of the year, absolute garbage. They went on, had a strong second half, made the playoffs, won a playoff game, and then kind of went against the Kansas City Chiefs. Only one half of a good year. Then the following year after that was up and down, up and down. They started 8-3 and finished 9-8 and missed the playoffs. So, no. Tua hasn't made a playoff appearance in his entire career? No. Jared Goff, like I said, fine. Justin Herbert, extremely talented, has put up great numbers every single year of his career. Hasn't made the playoffs. Justification there because of the regular season success. Unlike Dak, who has had great regular season success, consistent playoff failure, which is the kind of the thing for me with Dak. And then Jalen Hurts, we can make the justification he's there because you know what? He's been good every year he's been in the league. Last year was up and down, started off hot, finished off really, really cold. But here's the thing. He's one of 3 quarterbacks to make on this list to make a Super Bowl. So, sure. We can put him on this list because he had made a Super Bowl. And then Kyler Murray, no. Does not deserve to be on this list at all right now as we speak. No. Simply no. And I pretty much what I explained with Kyler Murray kind of explains for itself. So that's why these 3 things are very concerning to me. And to add a little bit, give a benefit of the doubt, to add a little bit of a counterpoint, in today's world, playoff stats and wins are overrated. People want to act like, just because you don't win in the playoffs doesn't mean you're not deserving, doesn't mean that, it's everything. Playoff stats and wins aren't everything to an NFL player's success in their career. Look at Larry Fitzgerald. Look at Calvin Johnson, for example. 2 receivers that really didn't do anything in the playoffs, but their team wasn't never in the playoffs. So it's like, hey. And then same for a quarterback like Phillip Rivers. Was very inconsistent with making the playoffs, but he was a top 10 quarterback in the league every year he was there just about. Right? So while it's not everything, people today, I will say this, they do tend to throw playoff stats and wins way out of proportion as reflective of, okay, this player is not good in the playoffs, they're not a good player. That's not true. And I know that how I'm explaining and how I'm interpreting the playoff stats and playoff wins and whatnot with these top 10 highest paid quarterbacks is adding fuel to that fire. I at least want to acknowledge that, it's not everything. It doesn't mean everything, and it's not reflective of who they are as a player in the regular season, and it's not reflective, at least right now with these quarterbacks, what their rest of their career is going to play out like either. So another nuanced thing that we have to lay out there. But likewise, it's also hard to win in the playoffs, and that's something people don't give teams enough credit for, or don't recognize enough, both. But it is hard to win in the playoffs. When you go up against a team in the playoffs, they're giving you everything they absolutely got most of the time. I mean, there's a reason why, the margin of victory in playoff games is much, much shorter compared to the regular season when you look at it statistically. Of course, the regular season is 272 games now compared to, 20-something games in the playoffs. So the sample size is obviously much, much different. But even then, the margin of victory, just when you look at it, is still the same. Or not still the same, is still vastly different. And that's because when you play in the playoffs, all teams are giving it everything they absolutely got. Because it's go big or go home. It's one win, you move on. One loss, you're out. Bye-bye, see you next year. So the intensity and... Excuse me, my mouth is getting dry. The intensity and the, impact and severity of these games is much more amplified, which for better or for worse is a double-edged sword because it makes you look good if you win, but also causes people to throw it way out of proportion if you lose all the time. So there is that. But I will say this. When you look at these top 10 highest paid quarterbacks now and look at the playoff stats that I listed, and then you look at the highest paid quarterbacks in 2013, 10 years ago, it's vastly different. Here are the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in 2013. From 1 to 10, I'm not going to show their contract. I couldn't find what their contracts were at the time. I saw what they were being paid, but what they're being paid doesn't matter in this retrospect. But, it's just kind of trying to be there as a statistic, as a metric to look at. But ultimately, the price that they're being paid doesn't matter. It's not the point of this rant. It's there, but it's not the point. So, number 1 to 10, and from the highest paid quarterbacks in 2013, Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers. Number 2, Atlanta Falcons, Matt Ryan. Number 3, Baltimore Ravens, Joe Flacco. Number 4, New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees. Number 5, Denver Broncos, Colts / Broncos, Peyton Manning. He was with the Broncos at this point in time. Dallas Cowboys, Tony Romo. Detroit Lions, Matthew Stafford. New York Giants, Eli Manning. Number 9, Houston Texans, Matt Schaub. And then number 10, Chargers, Phillip Rivers. And then looking at their playoff records over a 5-year span. Let me explain this for a second. So when you take the amount of years that the current top 10 highest paid quarterbacks have been in the NFL, the average that each quarterback, the average amount of years that the quarterbacks have played, like I said, all combined, it equated to about 4.8. We'll round up to 5 years. So we'll take a 5-year span from 2008 to 2012. And here's our first flaw of the data. Is that, these records I'm about to tell you are not reflective of the career stats of the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks of 2013. Because some of these quarterbacks were in the league longer prior to 2008. And also a majority of these quarterbacks played as starters way after 2012. But this is just to kind of put things in a different... It's kind of to show things in somewhat of a different perspective. So looking at a 5-year span, 2008 to 2012, and looking at the playoff records of these top 10 highest paid quarterbacks from that span. Number 1, Aaron Rodgers made the playoffs 4 out of 4 times being a starting quarterback. He started his first year as a starter in 2009. So 2008 he was not the starter. Brett Favre was. So the 4 years here he was the starting quarterback. He had a 5-3 playoff record, 1 Super Bowl appearance, and 1 Super Bowl win. Number 2, Matt Ryan made the playoffs 4 out of 5 years, but had a 1-4 playoff record, which is pretty interesting. Number 3, Joe Flacco. He had made the playoffs 5 out of 5 years, had a 9-4 playoff record, the best amount on this list, and had also a Super Bowl appearance and a Super Bowl win. Then number 4 is Drew Brees. He had made the playoffs 3 years out of 5 in this span, had a 4-2 playoff record, 1 Super Bowl appearance, and 1 Super Bowl win. Do you see a trend forming? Number 5, Peyton Manning. In this time, from 2008 to 2012, between his 2 times as the quarterback in Indy, and then 2012, he was the quarterback in Denver. But in this time, he had made the playoffs 4 out of 5 times. He had a 2-4 playoff record and 1 Super Bowl appearance. Didn't lose it. That was the year the Saints won the Super Bowl. Number 6, Tony Romo, the worst one on this list, made the playoffs 1 year out of 5 times, 1-1 playoff record. Well, maybe not the worst on this list. The worst one is coming up here in a second. Number 7, Matthew Stafford, made it 1 out of 4 times in this span. Because remember, he was a starter in 2000. He was drafted in 2009, so nuance. And made in 2011, 0-1. Obviously, Matthew Stafford, the reason why he didn't make the playoffs was because the team around him was absolute dog crap. That one's obvious that it wasn't on Matthew Stafford. But he's there, so it has to be said. Number 8, Eli Manning. In this period of time, made the playoffs 2 out of 5 times with a 4-1 playoff record, 1 Super Bowl appearance, 1 Super Bowl win. That was 2012 against the New England Patriots. This one also adds a lot of context behind it because he made the playoffs 2 out of 5 years, and 1 year he won the Super Bowl. The other year, I think they lost in the divisional round. So they lost in the wild card round. So it's like, hey, it is what it is. That kind of takes away from that Super Bowl a little bit, don't you think? Maybe. Depends on your perspective on that, but that's not the point of this rant. Then number 9, Matt Schaub made the playoffs 2 out of 5 times with a 2-2 record. And then lastly, Phillip Rivers, as we talked about before, made the playoffs 2 out of 5 times with a 1-2 playoff record. Now, I'm realizing now that I did not look at combined years making the playoffs, the winning record, teams with a winning record and teams with a losing record. Okay, so the combined record and combined years making the playoffs, that is obviously not here. I apologize. I forgot to put that into the script. But let's look for a second. Let's look at the other 3. One's quarterbacks with the winning record. in the playoffs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 4 quarterbacks on this list. This is pretty surprising. Fewer than I expected. But that is double of what the highest paid quarterbacks, how many quarterbacks have a winning record in the playoffs now. So that is double. How many have a losing record though? 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 fewer. And then the big one obviously is the Super Bowls. There's a combined 3 Super Bowls, and the current top 10 highest paid quarterbacks, neither of them have won it. There is currently 5 Super Bowl appearances on this list and 4 Super Bowl victories. So there is a pretty stark contrast in playoff success, at least on the surface, compared to before. Let's look at this for a second, actually. I think I'm going to make a jump cut. No, we're not doing jump cuts. No, I've been doing too many jump cuts in these videos. No, not happening. Not going to make my editing crap because my script is bad. We're going to go with it. Just kind of looking at it from a glance. That's 6 wins. That is, 6. What's 6 plus 9? That is 15. That's 19, 21, 22, 23. That is 23, 27, 29, 30 out of a possible 7, 11, 13, 17, 20, 24. So quarterbacks, at least here, have a winning record in the playoffs. It's a 30 and 24 record from playoff wins and playoff losses. So it's obviously winning compared to the losing record that the quarterbacks have currently right now. So it is obvious here that the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks in 2013 have a lot more playoff success compared to quarterbacks today. Now, to be fair, some of these, if you want to add context, sure. Joe Flacco literally accounts for 9 out of the 30. He literally accounts for almost 30% of the entire wins on this list. So there is that, and only 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks have more than 2 wins. So context, nuance that has to be talked about. But with that being all said and done, here are the flaws in the data that are obviously here. I want to acknowledge this because if you want me to revisit this at a later date with more statistics going more in depth than I am right now, I'm all for that. This conversation is one of the most nuanced in the entire NFL, and obviously I could have done a lot more to put into this, and I probably should have if I'm being entirely honest. But here are the flaws. Like I said before, this is not entirely reflective of the career stats compared to the current top 10 quarterbacks. The current top 10 quarterbacks, that's their playoff record right now throughout their entire career. To this point, some of these quarterbacks in the top 10 of 2013 had been in the league before the 2008 to 2012, statistical span. Like, for example, Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers, both drafted in 2004, 4 years before this statistic started. And then, obviously, a lot of them played, after 2012. So, it's not, like I said, it's not entirely reflective of their career playoff record, playoff wins, and whatnot. And also, like I said, this is taken from the average amount of years that the top 10 current highest paid quarterbacks have played. The average is they've played about 5 years. And likewise, this is what the previous top 10 quarterbacks looked like over a similar span, just going back to a decade. Okay, how did the top 10, how did they play the past 5 years? So we're kind of taking an average here. So it's not exactly, like record to record. There's an average here, which also, when it adds more nuance in this type of context, it adds an additional flaw to the data. Also, throughout this entire thing, as I mentioned, there are no playoff stats like yards, touchdowns, interceptions, completion percentage. That stuff is not here. Should it have been added? I would say yes. If I wanted a more nuanced conversation and a more in-depth conversation, yes. Most definitely it should have been there. But like I said, if you guys want me to revisit this conversation with more depth and with that nuance during the offseason or something, let's do it. I'm all for this conversation. This conversation, like I said, is one of the most interesting in the NFL, and it's one I enjoy talking about because there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of things to talk about, and of course, The vocabulary word of the day, nuance. I don't know how many times I'm gonna say that word, but I don't expect it to stop anytime soon till this video is over. Drinking more water. And second to last one, the NFL is a team sport. Just because a player has a losing playoff record does not represent how well they played in the playoffs. It's not a representation of just one player. It's a representation of the whole team. It's always been that way, and it will always continue to be that way. And like that being said, this rant is overrating the quarterbacks even more, like I said, because playoff records do not mean everything. It does not. It's not invictive. Is that the word I'm looking for? The current playoff records right now are not predictive of what the quarterbacks are going to be in the future. It's not predictive of how they are in the regular season. It does not mean 100% everything. While some people would be willing to debate that, and obviously there is reason to debate that, looking at guys like Dak Prescott, you would think, okay, 2-5 playoff record, he's bad in the playoffs, but also he's been really freaking good in the regular season. Whether you like him or not, whether you are a Dak Prescott lover, hater, his numbers in the regular season are comparable to Patrick Mahomes. Take that for what you will. So, I didn't mean to... said I was going to talk about more nuances later, but I ended up kind of talking about it throughout the entire rant, kind of, throughout the discussion. And those were, how well was the team? Did the team play well in the playoffs? How well did the quarterback play? All that stuff also has to be taken into account. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, Josh Allen, his playoff stats are actually pretty good, but when you look at the defense, you look at how many points per game they allowed and whatnot, it's a high number. And so obviously it's going to be harder to win a playoff game when your defense is allowing a lot of points. So there is that context that is very much needed for a discussion like this. But overall, while the flaws in the data are there, they're existent, and I already went through them, it is still interesting that there seems to be a very stark contrast in terms of playoff wins, Super Bowls, and all that stuff between the top 10 highest paid quarterbacks of 24 and 10 years ago in 2013. Probably should have gone to 2014. There you go. That's another flaw in the data. Going into 2024 should be going into 2014. So I should have included, instead of 2008 to 2012, it should have been 2009 to 2013. There's another flaw in the data that I just noticed right here, right now, which honestly, that makes me want to revisit this conversation again at another point. Now it's going, should we take rants? This will be the NFL quarterback, whatever I called it, whatever the thumbnail is going to be, the NFL quarterback contract problem, I guess is what it's going to be called. There's going to be a part 2. I think there's officially going to be a part 2. I don't know when it's going to be, but look forward to that at some point, probably in the offseason if I have to guess. But there we go. We're going to get a part 2 of this confirmed. Boom, breaking news right here and there. But like I said as well, while the flaws are there, there is something to be said here. There is something to be said that teams aren't paying based on success compared to 10 years ago. And why is that? Because there is no denying that there is a very big difference. There is no denying that. But there is an answer to this question. Why is it that teams seem to be not paying as based on success compared to 10 years ago? Why is that? Well, think about the top 10 quarterbacks on this list for current highest paid. Think about who they are as a player. What do one thing just about all of these quarterbacks have in common? Talent. Young and talented. The majority of them are, at least. And here's the thing. If you're putting the top 10 talented quarterbacks on this list, a majority of them would be there. Guys like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert. All of those quarterbacks would be on that list in top 10 quarterback talents. So obviously, it seems like organizations, NFL teams, are paying based on talent and ceiling over production, which is flawed. Why is it flawed? Well, to me, if you're paying based off of what they can be, what are you paying for? Because they'll say it's a vote of confidence, and head coaches and organizations will pay a quarterback, and they'll say it's a vote of confidence in their quarterback and their player. But this is probably the most opinionated part of the rant, but I think there's fear. I think there's a slight fear in doing this. Because the first fear is you don't want to let a guy that is objectively very talented walk and go somewhere else. Because if they go to somewhere else and are successful, then it, kind of sucks. Because think about the Lions. They let Matthew Stafford go. He goes and wins a Super Bowl. Look at Peyton Manning. Leaves the Colts, goes, wins the Super Bowl. Sure, they had Andrew Luck, who brought them a lot of success, but did he win them a Super Bowl? No. Didn't. Made the AFC Championship one time. Deflategate. Woo. But I don't know what that was. I was like, ooh. I don't know. I don't know what that was. Sorry. So there's that, but there's also a fear of messing up your franchise and setting it back a lot. Because here's the thing. These quarterbacks are still developing. They're still learning. That is a fact. But you invested a lot into these players. They're drafted in the first round. Some of them were drafted in the second. Dak was drafted in the fourth. But a lot of these guys, look, let's think about it for a second. Let me go scroll back up for a second. Where's that? Jordan Love, first round pick. Burrow, first round pick. Trevor, first round pick. Burrow and Trevor, number 1 overall picks, mind you. Tua, 5th overall pick. Jared Goff was the 1st overall pick. Justin Herbert was a 10th overall pick. Lamar, 1st round pick, 32nd. Jalen Hurts was a 2nd overall pick. Kyler Murray was a 1st overall pick. So 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks were 1st overall picks, and a vast majority of them were 1st round picks. So these are big investments you're putting into these players. Why am I typing on my keyboard? No. Close keyboard. Thank you. And let's roll back here. And so here's the thing. You're investing a lot into these players, and ultimately, if you mess up developing these quarterbacks, it's going to set your franchise back for years. Because that's just how economics work. If you put a lot of money into something and it doesn't work, it sets you backwards. It sets the business backwards. If you don't go out of business, that's basic. That's obvious. So what this leads to is teams, they're not just paying based on talent. They're paying and hoping. They're not praying and hoping. They're paying and hoping that these quarterbacks develop and bring them success out of fear that they don't want, first off, they don't want them to walk and go to another team and be successful, but also there's a fear that they got to continue to put more into it, even if they haven't shown the playoff success to back it up, because if they mess up this pick, it's going to set their franchise back. Kind of like how, look, our U.S. government. In my opinion, politicians just need to sacrifice their paychecks. They need to make sacrifices in order, these big time sacrifices, in order to build an economy and a government that's better for our future compared to the boomers that are in office right now. I'm not a very political person, but I'm just using this as an example. But in life, if you want to, if you want success, if you want long-term success, you have to make short-term sacrifice. And the thing is, these teams, they don't want to risk having to make a short-term sacrifice and have their team be bad and set them backwards. They already were at that point. There's a reason why a lot of these quarterbacks were picked in the first round, early first round, 1st overall, because the teams were already bad. They're starting a rebuild and making the short-term sacrifice of failure to get these quarterbacks and build them up to be good. So because they already made that sacrifice, they don't want to have to repeat the same thing over again in a short time. So paying the quarterback that you've invested a lot into to get, that you've, sacrificed a lot to get, you don't want that to fail. So you pay them despite the lack of playoff success in hopes that they can do that for you. And that, creates a lot of mediocrity in the NFL and that's something a lot of players have talked about. Tom Brady is one that talked about there has a lot of mediocrity in the NFL because back 10 years ago and even before that, the NFL was a lot more cutthroat. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that. If you were not, no matter how good you were in the regular season, if you weren't getting it done in the playoffs, you weren't going to cut it. One thing that really comes to mind, think about how many times Andy Reid and the Eagles made the playoffs in the early 2000s and then they fired Andy Reid in 2012. That's crazy to me. I mean, he's the best head coach the Eagles have ever had, arguably. Eagles fans, let me know what your thoughts about that are in the comments. But he is a very accomplished head coach, and he was constantly in the playoffs and competing for the Philadelphia Eagles. But because he went to the Super Bowl, lost, and couldn't make it back, he was fired. Because eventually it gets to a point where, how many times can you make the playoffs without getting back to where you were before it gets frustrating? Because there's an expectation, because you weren't meeting expectations. And likewise with Tony Dungy and the Buccaneers. They had made the NFC Championship how many years? In the 1998, 1999, and 2001. They had made multiple playoff appearances, but despite constantly being super close to making the Super Bowl, Tony Dungy was fired. And then they hired John Gruden and they won the Super Bowl. Of course, in my opinion, they got lucky in that Super Bowl run. But hey, that's something to look at. And then Tony Dungy obviously went to the Colts and then won a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. So there's that. But that goes to show that the NFL was a lot more cutthroat and expectations were even higher than they are now. In a sense, the expectations now were just completely over proportionalized and completely out of control. But back then, that gets to a point where if you get to a certain point one year and you can't make it back, that gets frustrating. That gets annoying. And like I said, is it overrating how hard it is to win the NFL and win the playoffs? Yes, it is. But it's still a factor. It is still a factor because the NFL ultimately stands for not for long. What have you done for me lately? And if you made a Super Bowl 10 years ago and it's been, you've made the playoffs 9 out of the past 10 years, but you haven't made it back to the Super Bowl, what's happened? What have you done for me lately? You've made the playoffs, but you haven't gotten us back to where we were before. No, let's get a new guy in that can probably do that. That's how the business works. And like I said, it's cutthroat. The NFL is still a cutthroat business, but it was definitely a lot more cutthroat 10 plus years ago than it is now. And in some of these cases, the organizations were just wrong to pay the guy, or they were incompetent to build around legitimate talent. One of them, like Matt Schaub. Why did they pay Matt Schaub? The Texans paid? I have no freaking clue. In retrospect, that was a bad decision. But like Phillip Rivers, for example, Phillip Rivers is a Hall of Famer quarterback. He's a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. He was top 5, top 10 guaranteed every year he was in the NFL, just about. But the Steve Spanos never built the team around the Chargers to consistently go into the playoffs and compete because he's a super cheap owner. And Chargers fans, I am sorry. I am sorry to bring that up and rub some salt on that wound. At this point, it's a scar, but I apologize. And ultimately, the big takeaway from this conversation is something I've said multiple times. If you're giving more money to a quarterback, that's less money for everybody else. So if they're not winning now on a rookie deal, when you're paying them, it's going to make it that much harder to win because there's not as much money to go around. And if there's a lack of wins now, mixing with less money being around for everyone else, history tells us that it's not expected to get much better. But like I said, just because they don't have a good playoff record now doesn't mean it's not going to get better. History shows that it's not as likely to get better, but it is still possible. But I think that's it. I think We got everything. We laid everything out on the table. I think it was longer than I thought. It's 9:28 right now. I started recording at like 8:20 something. I think I'll have to look. I don't think it's been an hour. That'd be crazy if it's been over an hour. That's a long time for a Shumake Take rant. But that is going to do it to me. That is talking about the NFL quarterback contract problem. And hope you guys enjoyed this. There is going to be a part 2 because we got to have more nuance into this conversation. But let me know your thoughts. Leave them down in the comments down below. I would greatly appreciate it. Right now, I'm trying to respond to everybody because not very many people are commenting. Please do, please do, please do, please do. But other than that, don't forget to do what every other YouTuber tells you to do. Like, comment, subscribe. I already said comment, but like, subscribe, share the video, promote it to your friends, promote it to your family. Get everybody in here to the Shumake Take. I love this podcast and I want to grow it. And it's going to take you guys to help me make that happen. But that will do it today. Thanks again for stopping by. Like I said, don't forget to do all that good stuff. And hope you guys have a fantastic day. And I will see you in the next one.